Okay, welcome to GothCast, episode 28. I am Dr. Sanders.
And I'm Robbie Gore.
And today we have actually what I think is going to be a pretty interesting episode because of the nature of this band.
I definitely agree. This is a band that is not necessarily on everybody's radar. They're definitely known within the Gothic community, but definitely not one of the big, heavy-hitting names that everybody goes to.
Yeah. And they changed up their sound a lot as time went on. And maybe some of the hits that people are familiar with may not be the best songs from this band. And we're going to do a part 2 of this band later on.
Yeah.
Just so you know, which might include some more familiar songs that people may know a little bit better, at least in terms of like pop culture kind of sense. But the band is Cocteau Twins.
Yes. So the Cocteau Twins were formed in 1979 by Guthrie and Heggie, who were both from Grangemouth, which is in Scotland. And they met at a local disco where they met Fraser. And they would form the band the Cocteau Twins. Their initial influences were bands like The Birthday Party, Sex Pistols, Susie and the Banshees, and Kate Bush.
Yeah, and so starting off, this band definitely had a shift in sound as time went on. And they started out much like most post-punk bands. Very reverb heavy, very kind of sporadic vocals, not really a ton of like melody in there.
Very drony, kind of got very drony guitars.
Yeah, not I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't want to say repetitive, but the earliest stuff is a little bit like that, and might as well just get in the first album because it kind of has
directly to do with what we're talking about right now.
all these sort of things. So Garlands released that in 1982.
Yes, so this is their first studio album.
Yeah, released on 4AD, and it's a very I don't know. If you're familiar with the Cocteau Twins, you might not like this one, or this one may seem kind of weird to you.
It might feel a little bit out of place. It's definitely very different from the sound they would go on to produce on later albums.
Yeah, and we see this with a lot of bands that are associated with a gothic sound, and the Cocteau Twins don't necessarily stay to that formula. When you think of a goth band, Cocteau Twins probably isn't going to be one of your first sort of thought. It isn't going to be one of the first bands that you think of, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, because they are very good in a very unique way.
I definitely think that they provide something to the community that is very unique, at least from the standpoint of ingenuity. I think a lot of bands would kind of carry on in that sort of sound.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways they kind of pioneered and we'll get to what their later sounds are, but it's basically more ethereal kind of sounding music.
Yeah, almost like a little bit of synth pop sort of thing, but
it is somewhere between synth pop and shoegaze.
Yeah, something like that. But with Garlands, it's pretty much post punk. I mean,
it's like straight up post punk.
Yeah,
almost gothic rock kind of.
Yeah, and this is actually kind of similar, to a lot of bands that are associated with goth, right? Obviously. Of course, The Cure, their first album, Three Measure Boys, was different than what came afterwards. Susie and the Banshees' first 2 albums were a lot different than Kaleidoscope.
Definitely.
And you just have a lot, even In the Flat Fields, different than Mask,
Yeah.
Pretty dramatically so. And with this, I gotta say, it's not my favorite release from Cocteau Twins. And, if this was from another band, I might be a little more into it.
I could definitely see that. I would agree with you. It's not my favorite release by this band. And that's not to say that this is a bad album. However, I feel like they do go on to release much better material and much more interesting material. And so by comparison, this album falters. And I mean, I might as well just get right into it. One of the reasons that this album is perhaps not as good as some of their later material is that this album is, while every song on this album is a very good song in and of its own right, they're all very similar. And so this album falters by basically being a bit too repetitive, unfortunately. Yeah,
and it's actually hard to kind of distinguish some of the songs from each other. Has very basic drum machine sounds, and Cocteau Twins would use a drum machine pretty often.
Yep.
But on this one, it just is really repetitive, really basic, and like all the synths and everything were just sort of, droning on. It's just really repetitive. It's mostly minor keys, so it's not really...
Yeah, it's not quite death rock, but it reminds me of it in the way that it kind of has that droning sound to it.
Yeah, it doesn't switch it up a lot. It kind of just takes the same kind of melody and tries to add different lyrics and different things to it.
Or like changing, like adding rhythms on top of rhythms.
Yeah.
And that kind of sort of textural creation.
Yeah, and... that's just really the biggest issue with this one. And, I do really like Elizabeth Fraser's lyrics.
Yeah.
I mean, the way she sings. Okay. And on this one, she actually sings a little bit differently than she would later.
It's a different style for her on this album.
A little more withdrawn, a little less kind of booming than she would be famous for.
Yeah, I would say this album is more in the vein of classic goth vocals, where you kind of again have this kind of darker, kind of lower registered, just kind of
basic
kind
lines.
Of a drone,
it's just, and I want to say at this time, if anybody's familiar with Cocteau Twins, you can understand the lyrics more on this album probably than any other release.
Yes,
and this is still kind of her style, but it's just not as developed, and we're gonna see that the next album push it a little bit farther. But with the Garlands, it just is not as good of an album because of the band that it is. If this was, I don't know, like some other band, just...
It's a good debut album in its own right. It has its flaws. Unfortunately, though, I think that we're just so attached to the later material that this is so far removed from that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to kind of take that in and appreciate necessarily what this album does do.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. When I wasn't familiar with as much of their material, I thought this album was okay. Like, it wasn't great. It wasn't, like the worst album I've ever heard. It kind of sat in the middle for me in terms of albums that I've heard that have that sort of stereotypical 80s, early 80s goth sound.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it just kind of blends in with a lot of the keyboard heavy goth music or drum machine heavy goth music. It just doesn't stand out, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of critics were split with this album. Some of them criticized it for being repetitive, like we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And those who did like it felt that it was a good tribute to bands like Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy and Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah. I don't know if Sisters of Mercy was out by this point. I think it was probably pretty close. Bauhaus was out. And definitely Susie and the Banshees was out.
Yeah, definitely both those two.
Yeah. But I think Sisters of Mercy was... I think First and Last Noise was like 85 or something.
Yeah, it might have been the later albums where I read, a comparison. But in a similar vein to the Sisters of Mercy, they used a TR-808 drum machine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just like, and there's no mistaking it, by the way. Like,
yep.
I mean, sometimes we say, oh, like maybe this band used a drum machine or something like that. There's no mistaking the drum machine on this one. It's very, very basic.
Yeah. And, just the overall aesthetic of this album is, it's kind of, I hate to say it, but it's a little formulaic. You've got, your typical goth vocal.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have guitars that are drenched in reverb and have, are feeding back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have your stock Roland TR-808 drum sound,
mm-hmm.
that, just backs the band. And then that pretty much, between that and the bass, covers their sound. There's not a lot going on mixing wise, nothing crazy being done to any of the tracks. It's a pretty straightforward album. It is an enjoyable album. There's tracks on here that I like. I think that it is at the very least a good demonstration of their ability to write songs.
Yeah.
I just don't think that this album was produced in the best way.
It's just hard to say.
Yeah,
it's hard to say with the time, because as far as I know, the band themselves don't hate this album.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been a lot of, people often say that it's okay. Like, a lot of people say that it's okay.
No one hates this album, really.
Yeah. But maybe for the time it was like the band saw it as like, oh, like this is music that we like, this is music that we listen to, like let's do an album like this. But yeah, actually it's just, to me it's just really generic. It's okay.
I think that we've reviewed a lot worse albums, so I'll give it some credit.
Okay, yeah, we reviewed definitely a lot worse albums.
It's certainly guilty of being a bit derivative.
Yeah.
However, I do think that it does some things well. It's not a bad first album, for this band necessarily.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the best album in the world, but the Three Imaginary Boys is kind of a little bit of a mess. And, a lot of these bands, their first albums were vastly different from the sounds that they would go on to produce.
It's true.
And there's not a lot of people who want to go pick up Three Imaginary Boys. And while this might not be anyone's favorite album, I do think that there are people who would go out and buy it.
We've had a lot of people disagree with us on our opinion of Three Imaginary Boys, by the way.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people who say, like, this album's, like, way better than, like, this album or this album, and it's, yeah.
They're entitled to that opinion.
I don't know. It's funny. I that's one of those things where, like, I always say that I encounter people who are like, I can't believe you said Floodland wasn't that great, because, obviously you like Floodland more, and I like First and Last and Always more, and then the other one I always get is Three Imaginary Boys. People are like, I love Three Imaginary Boys, and like, I'm like, we didn't say we didn't like it.
Well, we didn't say we did like it.
We say it. I don't know. We like some of the, we
liked a few tracks on there.
Yeah, whatever. I'm just saying. But yeah, it's if you start with this band, don't start with this album. I'll say that.
Yeah. But then I don't know if I would suggest they go back and listen to it. So maybe do start with this album.
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I would say it's more an interesting listen if you're a fan of Cocteau Twins.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a good way to place it. Yeah. I would say start with, their later material. And if you really want to go back and see what they were like before that, check out this album.
Yep. So that's Garlands.
Yep.
Welcome to recent interesting goth stuff. Now,
AKA Riggs.
Yeah, Riggs. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I thought this was funny because I think this person is very funny and they're very aware of what they do.
Yeah.
And it's Rob Zombie, and I know people have a very polarizing view on Rob Zombie. They either are really into him, or they're like, is that guy who plays techno and sings about Dracula?
Yeah.
Yeah, but Rob Zombie, I think, definitely has some pretty good music.
I would agree.
Especially when he was with White Zombie. A lot of that was obviously a little bit different, but it's basically like a fusion of like almost techno dance beats and like heavy metal, and like it's really, really strange.
Yeah.
And so, and classic rock too. He has one album that's a very classic rock influence, but he's coming out with a new album April 29th. So I'm recording this, is just like days away.
Yep.
And it's going to be called The Electric Warlock Acid Witch Satanic Orgy Celebration Dispenser.
Yeah, he knows how to name an album.
Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. It is crazy. But yeah, Rob Zombie is a very interesting person. Obviously he directs lots of movies, and I actually really like some of his movies.
Yeah, he's done some good work.
Yeah, and his new one's going to be called 31. I think we talked about it when it was first, like the trailer first came out or something like that.
Yeah, it actually just got sold to Saban. Okay,
yeah, it's cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to that. I mean, I thought, some of his stuff is obviously hit or miss.
Yeah.
Devil's Rejects I thought was great. Yeah, if you're into horror movies and you don't mind a little bit of blood,
yep.
That's the one I recommend. You can watch the prequel to it, House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yeah.
It's a little more like a long music video kind of thing. It's like killing people, and
kind of feels like a Rob Zombie music video.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So there's that. But Devil Rejects I think is really good, and I forget what's the other one he's done that's really good. But yeah, he's very interesting. And I also wanted to say his band is really funny because he basically took
Marilyn Manson's band.
Yeah, basically took Marilyn Manson's band. So his drummer right now is John Five, and his drummer,
his guitar player
is John Five, and his drummer is Gingerfish. And that was Marilyn Manson's like guitarist and drummer. I mean, he's been his drummer since Marilyn Manson's first album, but then he I forget which album he left on. I think it was maybe The High and the Low, or maybe it was right after that.
Yeah.
But then of course John Five was with him for a number of years, but now he's with Rob Zombie, and when they play live, man, they definitely feel like they've been playing together for years.
Because they're great musicians.
Yeah, they're really, really good. And
fortunately, Marilyn Manson's current lineup is not
who's in his lineup? Like, that's the thing.
Twiggy.
No, it's Twiggy. Yes, right. Twiggy's in his lineup, but who knows who's in? Yeah, it's this whole thing. But that's not the discussion right now. But I thought that was something that was funny to mention. But I liked his last album too. I thought it was, you kind of know what to expect from a Rob Zombie album, and that's gonna be something a little weird, referencing like the mysterious nature of like horror movies or sci-fi things and all these kind of different things.
There'll be some quirky guitar just by the nature of John 5 being in the band.
Oh yeah, exactly. So look forward to that. And I'm gonna look forward to it, and I'll maybe when it comes out I'll give a listen and say something about it. I can't guarantee it, but because we listen to a lot of music anyway. Yep. But if we ever do a Rob Zombie thing, then hey, we got another album to listen to. So yeah, and then is there something else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just kind of want to briefly mention something that I thought was interesting. In Whitby, which is in the UK, apparently they had a festival this weekend, which is it's for charity. It's to raise money for the Food Bank for Whitby program, and basically a bunch of goths get together and they play football, or soccer as we know it in America.
Yeah, which is weird that that's what we call it. So,
but I just thought it was a really interesting idea that once a year, apparently this has been going on for about 20 years now. They all gather in Whitby and they get ready. They get all decked out and they're as goth as they can get, and they get on the field and they play some soccer.
Yeah, basically means that I would just roll out of bed.
Yep. Not to say that goth people can't play sports, but it's not something that they're particularly known for. So I think it's a really cool charity movement that they get together and play a sport to raise money.
Yep, that's how you get goths out of the house, man. Yep. Raise money for something. That's super awesome. Like that's like amazing, and I love that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know. More to the topic of language, right?
Yeah.
Why do we call football soccer and we call American football when it should be called hand egg? Because it's basically, you don't play American football.
Or like girls rugby.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's just like, I don't get it. Like, it's like, you don't even, you really use your foot. And
I'm sorry if you like American football.
It's just not our thing. But I don't understand why you play a game and you don't kick the ball, or foot is not touching the ball for 90%.
Yeah, 90% of the game.
Yeah, and it's like the only time it's like, and every time I bring that up, I'm like, you're mostly carrying the ball. You're throwing the ball with your hands, and people are like, well, you do a field goal and you kick it. I'm like, that's the only time.
Yep.
It's like that, and I don't know. I think sometimes they kick it down the field or something. I don't know, but like, I just never understood it. But I like what people call hand egg, because it looks like somebody's running down the field with an egg.
It also sounds more British too.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It gives it some merit.
Yeah. So
America, start calling it hand egg.
Hand egg 2014.
Let's stop being dicks. Let's stop taking names of other sports and claiming them as our own.
Exactly. Soccer is soccer. Football is hand egg.
Yes.
No, wait. That's not what I meant.
Football is soccer.
Football is soccer.
Soccer is football.
Whatever. All right, well.
Hand egg is football.
Yeah. So that's the recent interesting stuff.
Rigs.
Yeah, Rigs. Recent interesting goth stuff. So, yeah. Thank you. All right, the next album we're going to be talking about is Head Over Heels.
So this is the second studio album for Cocteau Twins.
Yeah, and definitely a step in, I think, a better direction.
I would definitely agree.
Still not my favorite, though. Even for this group of albums that we're talking about.
I think I like it more than you do, but
I know you like it more than I do. But yeah, I don't know. You sort of have this sort of catchiness, like a bit of a pop element coming into it that was kind of lacking from the first album.
Definitely.
And like I said on many episodes, I don't really listen to a ton of pop music.
Yeah.
Like I prefer things with a lot of guitars and things like that. And
it definitely has a lot of guitars.
Yeah. That's kind of why I like the Cure's brand of pop music. It's largely based on guitars. And this album sort of moves towards a little bit more of the catchy side of songwriting.
Definitely.
but it does retain some of those elements of the first album, and unfortunately, some of the downfalls of Garlands.
Yeah, to some extent. I do feel like it was a significant step in the right direction for them. I don't feel like it's nearly as repetitive as Garlands is. I can, when I was listening to Garlands, it was hard for me to really even pick out songs that I liked because so many of them sounded similar to me.
Yeah.
Whereas with this album immediately, I was able to, pick out some songs that I felt like really stood out on the album. For one, I thought The Tinderbox of a Heart was a great song.
Oh, yes. You've seen the Banshees, right? Tinderbox, right?
Yep. There's some cool, like, xylophone-y kind of sounds on there.
Yeah.
It's got, like, this jazziness about it.
Yeah, I like the saxophone, actually, on this album, which is weird.
Yeah.
Like, so.
And then, Musette and Drums, I thought was a really cool song. I felt like it had a lot of power to it, and a lot of catchiness, a lot of... a really good demonstration of them being able to write good songs and good material. And also In Our Angelhood, I thought was a great song for that album.
Yeah. It still kind of has the sort of minor key kind of...
It does. I think that's why I like this album, is because it moves towards their later sound, but it still kind of has that minor key
which means
tonality
it's a little bit dark. To our friends who might not know what that means, which means that things are a little bit still depressing.
Yeah, it's a sadder, angrier sounding tonality. It isn't necessarily going to be marking of their later albums, especially as they move further away from that.
Yeah.
But I feel like it works on this album, and for me, I feel like this is a good introductory album. Like if you want to get an idea of what their early sound is and what their later sound is,
I would say it's definitely a blend of their early stuff to, and not the huge step that they would take right after this album. Yeah. So it kind of is that perfect in between like standard goth music and sort of a little bit poppier, shoegazy kind of stuff.
It's considered the archetype of what would be ethereal wave music.
Cool.
But like, I just thought it was a great step for them. And I kind of think that, their bass player leaving the band, unfortunately, kind of benefited them. Yeah,
because it's the first time that they're working as a duo.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I do want to say is that there are some big milestones for this band at this moment, right? Mm-hmm. So not only is the first album is really a duo, which is kind of how everything would be produced from then on.
Yep.
At least, maybe the main people working on it. But you do have a very unique vocal style coming in.
Definitely.
So Fraser, she really is known for this very, very unique vocal style in which she would make things very hard to understand and sometimes just use her mouth or the vocals almost as its own instrument. And
it's very reminiscent of a kind of like Eastern style, like singing, like throat singing and things like that, where you use like the tonalities of your voice to, emote certain pitches and things like that.
So she uses like foreign words. She doesn't always speak in English. She doesn't always speak in French. She sometimes she just makes up words. Sometimes she just goes ha ha hoo. It's like
it's all about the melody for her, which I think is a really interesting concept because from the standpoint of instrumental music, you have chordal and then you have melodic, two pieces of like any major song or chords and melody. And we're so used to hearing lyrics specifically with songs, and she takes singing and kind of strips it down to its core, just melody, really. And that's a very innovative thing to do and a very bold move. I don't think a lot of people would necessarily ever take that risk to strip away lyrics from a vocal line necessarily.
And she's talked about it a whole bunch of times, been asked about it, and I think she said something sort of like, I didn't want it to be analyzed that way. I just wanted to make music, and I didn't want to be like this, person who has my lyrics analyzed and be like, okay, well, what does this mean? What are you saying here? Or you're saying this about this, And I think that's pretty awesome.
I agree. I think it's a sign of brilliance in terms of songwriting.
Smart move.
And even Robin Guthrie, you start to see some of his signature guitar sounds start to show up on this album.
I think it's almost. I definitely think it was starting to get influenced not only by the goth music, but also sort of the new wavy type of stuff that was coming out. But you have some songs that I think, especially songs like Sugar Hiccup.
Yep.
Sugar Hiccup. By the way, that song, like, if you want to get a song stuck in your head, just play Sugar Hiccup, man. That is like the most annoying song. I like the song, but man, the song is so annoying to me because
it's very catchy.
It just drives a nail into my head. That's called Sugar Hiccup. But that song is really catchy. It kind of has that sort of like a little bit of new wave, kind of the more jangly guitars kind of sound. I do like it, but yeah, like I said, it gets stuck in my head all the time. So I find it, like, I love it, but it's also really annoying. But you also have songs like Multifoiled, which I really like.
Oh, I love that song.
Yeah, right? So it's a good song.
Yep.
And that's actually really the two, what I think are the two strongest. Oh, man, that was a tongue twister. But that's really what I think are the two strongest songs on the album for me.
Yeah.
Like I said, I still think some of the repetitive elements of this album are on here. From Garland's transfer over to this one. And
I could see that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's nearly as repetitive as Garlands.
No, it's not as repetitive, but I still find, for me, it's a detractor that there is repetition in this album. When I'm listening to it, I'm like, oh, how long is this song?
Fair enough. I disagree. I could see where you would feel that way.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not a detraction on this album. Well,
it's because it's obvious. That's why I think. That's why I think I could see it.
Yeah. Because it's obvious. Yeah, it's not because of bias at all.
No, not in any way.
No,
I don't know why you would think that. but yeah, it's just I just find it repetitive. But yeah, it's not. You're right. It's not nearly as much as Garland's, but for me, it's still like come on, just switch it up.
No, I get it. It's a hard switch to make when you're after you've heard their later material, to go back and listen to these albums. Most of the time, I think a lot of people would rather listen to, the future albums than, these first two.
Yep, that's right. So it's better.
I think it's worth checking out.
I think less so. I still, I get what you're saying in that it's a good place to start, but I still just think that the next album after this is so much better.
I agree, but would you tell someone to start with Disintegration for The Cure?
I don't know. I mean, I'd probably tell. It depends. Depends on the person, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I still don't know that I would tell most people if they're like, okay, hey, recommend a Cocteau Twins album. I don't know if be like, they never heard it. I'd be like, probably not what would come to my head.
Fair enough.
After a few albums,
if a music junkie came, people like you and me came up to you, or I want to get in the Cocteau Twins, where should I start?
I say try any other album than the first two.
Fine.
All right. Well, so that's head over heels.
Yep.
All right. So now we're on to
what Donnie considers the first real album.
This is what I consider the first real Cocteau Twins album. You may acknowledge the other two, and obviously, I mean, I acknowledge them because we just talked about them, but I like to think that they don't. I never listened to the first two.
I acknowledge the second one.
I know it's part of that album, but all
right, we're gonna spend way too much time talking about that.
Yeah, right. So, Treasure released at 1984, and so that again, these bands' time, 1982, 1983, 1984.
Yep.
And so this was a huge step musically for Cocteau Twins. This is where a lot of people kind of would be familiar with this sound.
Yeah, this is where they really start to come into their own with their traditional sound, the sound that would further their career and would be associated with all their albums to come, and the sound that people would think of when they think of the Cocteau Twins.
Yeah, so it's a bit more poppy, and by a bit more poppy, I mean very much more melodic, and not necessarily very hooky, but definitely something you could definitely hum along to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also very reverb heavy. It definitely has a lot of goth staples in the way that it's mixed, the way it's produced, and a lot of the songwriting. But it does its own thing, and it's very hard to explain what Cocteau Twins is.
It's very experimental.
Yeah.
They really dive in with the vocals more. and like really get into that signature sound that they have of, kind of just wordless melodic, exploration of sound. And the guitars just start
so
to
good.
Yep.
So good. In fact, this is like this. I love the guitars on this album because they are very chorus heavy. They're very echoey. They're extremely catchy. They're very dynamic. Like all the acoustic guitars and everything like that.
They are.
It's just like the one thing I love about what they do with their sound, especially when it finally becomes what I think is like their sound.
Yeah.
Is just like how we said that Fraser always wanted the vocals to be its own instrument, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that because of that understanding, it seemed like they really had an understanding of like how instruments intertwine together, right?
Yes.
So how a drum machine intertwines with a bass guitar, and how a bass guitar goes with the acoustic guitar, how the acoustic guitar goes, like it's everything together. So you have this really, really strong performance from everything in the band.
And everything really bonds tightly together. There's not a lot of separation between sounds. Like everything kind of feels like this wall of sound hitting you.
Yeah. And it's great. Treasure is totally awesome. People love it. And, it's hard for me to pick. I'll basically do this. You know how I usually say, like, here's my favorite song on the album.
Yeah.
Here's the only one I don't really like, and it's Persephone. And I know a lot of people like this song, but I feel like it's too much like Beatrix and some of the other stuff on the album.
No, I would actually agree with you on that.
Okay.
I thought Beatrix was much better than Persephone.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think so too. But you also have like Ivo, which is a great opener. It's
Ivo's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a perfect balance between major and minor tonalities, and these shifts that happen throughout the song, which create mood and perspective for the listener. I think it's like a perfect demonstration of great songwriting, and the fact that it's being written by just primarily their singer and their guitar player just shows how well they work as a duo and the understanding that they have of the sound that they want and their ability to achieve it.
Yeah. And also you have I think probably is my favorite song on the album. It's hard to say which one's my favorite, but
I'm curious to see what this was.
Aloysius.
Okay.
I just love the guitar work on that. And
it's a really good song.
I love it.
Me, I don't know how you feel about the song. For me, my favorite was Domino. I felt like...
Okay, yeah, I can see it.
I felt like it had this beautiful, like, cinematic quality to it.
Yeah. A lot of this album actually does. It's just, I don't know. A lot of the songs, I'll say, they blend together, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And, we complain about that a lot, especially when we do... I forget. We've done a whole bunch of bands like that. I mean, even Susie the Banshees is sometimes guilty of that. And, and I feel like some of the albums sort of blend together. Some of the songs within albums blend together a little bit in that, they kind of sounds the same. These albums kind of melt into one another. If I could use some kind of big, kind of like music critic word,
Yeah. I could see this album and a lot of their albums that continue to come easily being like soundtracks to movies, or like a album that you put on and just drive to and just feel the wind like rustling through your hair.
Something like that. Yeah,
like it's an overstatement, it's hyperbole, but
so everyone picture Robbie Gore in the car with the wind blowing in his hair,
listening to the Cocteau Twins. Treasure.
Yep. I just really like it. In fact, this is where I would tell people to start with the bands, where I would tell them to, this is really where it starts to me.
This is the epitome of their classic sound. I will give you that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just in a lot of ways, it is one of those things where it's like, okay, this is where it feels like it starts. Just like Susie and the Banshees, I feel like Kaleidoscope is really where it starts. I know a lot of people would argue with me on that. Like,
I agree with you there.
But yeah, I feel like that's really where a lot of people will just go back to, and they still really connect with it in the same way, or maybe even in a different way, but still they really connect with it today. Yeah. And Treasure is, probably always will be known as that album for the Cocteau Twins.
I would agree.
As the milestone of, when they kind of developed.
Yeah. I also wanted to quickly mention that I really love the bass line in Beatrix.
Okay, yeah.
I thought it sounded so cool. Like it works so well with like everything in the song.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just a perfect example of, how the whole album works. Like everything fits perfectly together.
Yeah. But I also wanted to talk about the band's opinion of this album. Now, Treasure, I have to say, a lot of people still review it today because of its, of the way it sounds and, how many people it connects with and still people discover today. And a lot of people just say, oh, this album is amazing, it's one of the best pop albums, it's one of the best, whatever. But the band do not seem to like it as much. So, bass guitarist Simon Raymonde, he alluded to being rushed and unfinished, while Guthrie referred to it as an abortion. So Robin Guthrie called this album an abortion, even though everybody loves it.
Well, okay. And then this is why I give some credit to the album before it, is because as much as I love this album, I think this album is great. I highly recommend it to people. I think that the next album takes everything that this album does and does it 100 times better.
When we get to that, I'm gonna disagree with you, because while I do think the next album is really good, right?
Yeah.
I think Treasure strikes that perfect balance for me between like kind of poppiness and sort of kind of the kind of shoegazy elements of their music. It just really connects with me in that way where it gets me really drawn into it. Not that the next album doesn't, but it has a few more problems that I'll talk about like when we get to it. And it's not that it's bad or anything like that, but just comparatively, I think this album is, of these 4 albums, the best.
I highly disagree, but we'll get to that, I suppose.
Yeah. Man. Treasure's just so good.
It's a great album.
It's amazing.
I still think the next album's better.
I don't know about that. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me.
I'm sure they would agree with you.
Yes. People tell him. People tell him how great Treasure is.
I'm not saying Treasure's bad. I just said it's probably like the best album they've released up to this point.
I don't know about that. So, but yeah, that's Treasure. I very highly recommend it. If you're trying to score it on vinyl,
good luck.
Good luck, because this album is very sought after. It's pretty expensive. In fact, you can, for the first 4 albums, it's kind of hard to find on vinyl. I don't know if they're just lower pressings or there aren't as many repressings or anything. I could have sworn there was a repressing of Treasure that was done a few years ago now, but I don't. Prices wouldn't reflect that.
Yeah,
at least on vinyl.
Yeah.
So, but if you're looking for it, a lot of places, you can find it, and I really recommend it.
Yeah.
So, that's Treasure. It is a treasure.
It is.
Okay, so now we're on to Victorialand, and this is what you think is the best album of this podcast in this era, but why don't you tell everybody why you think that?
Okay. So the last album is obviously the first development and the materialization of what their signature sound will be.
Yeah.
However, I feel like this album goes ahead and takes that sound and moves it a step forward. This album is much more so a duo album, and they do a lot given the restrictions that they have and what they're working with. And for that, I feel like this is a very ambitious album. It takes the idea that we're going to use acoustic guitars and chorus and reverb and not really even lyrics, just melody and tonalities of the voice, and just create songs that are based on atmosphere and space. And they do so in such a way that's very beautiful. And I feel like while the last album was a great album, I feel like this was much more a work of art, and I appreciate that.
Well, I agree with that to an extent, right? This album's definitely more delicate than the previous one, than Treasure. It's like acoustic. There's pretty much no percussion on this album at all, and it's definitely different, especially you look 2 albums before that. But I don't like this album as much. Like, it's because I think Treasure has a perfect balance of like soft to kind of poppier songs to maybe a little bit of that still kind of post-punk in there, whereas this one I felt was, while they're all good songs. You know, it kind of feels like one giant piece throughout the entirety of this album.
It's true, but bands, you know, like The Cure are known for doing albums like that. Like Disintegration is a perfect example of an album that kind of just sort of blends together.
Love Song
is just another story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on Disintegration.
Should have been removed from that album.
Oh. But yeah, I mean, it is technically a work of art, right? Victorialand is unique. It's
almost a concept album.
I guess it's hard to say if any of the stuff is a concept album because of the way they, you know, obviously lyrically and stuff. Like it's more like tonally. They're
almost like a concept band.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, this is also another one of those albums. I mean, it's pretty much when Fraser did not try to even make her lyrics legible or.
Oh, that's what I appreciate about it. Like they're doing something that is very bold. This album could have been a complete dump. Like it could have been trashed by critics, could have been hated by fans, because they're doing something really weird. They're essentially getting rid of the band dynamic, and they're completely throwing the whole notion of lyrics out the window. Yet they're able to pull it off.
Yes and no. I mean, I still think Treasure's a better album. And I think a lot of people would agree that it's a better album.
I also think that just as many people would agree that this is the better album.
I don't know about that. I mean, does Victorialand make it on tons of lists all the time? You don't know that. I don't even know that.
Yeah, you don't know that either.
I don't know that either. But I still think like Treasure has more of a variety of music on it.
I know what you're saying. I do like Treasure. Like, I think it's a very good album. I think it definitely pushed them in the right direction, and it still maintained their band dynamic. However, I like this album for what it tries to do and what it accomplishes, and I think that it was a significant milestone in their career.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with that, especially since I think this actually ended up charting pretty well when it was released. This is about, you know, with Treasure, they kind of were able to break through it a little bit more.
Imagine.
Huh?
Imagine this album charted.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. I don't know, I feel like this album is kind of modern sounding almost, like, and Treasure too. Like, I feel like there are albums that could be released like today, you know?
Definitely. A lot of this music is kind of being revisited right now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's like especially with, you know, Victorialand has like acoustic and it's kind of poppy and has a woman singing
and the, you know, overuse of reverb.
Oh yeah, well, of course. GarageBand. But still, yeah, I mean, these two albums, right? So Treasure and Victorialand, they are really the place you should start with Cocteau Twins. I really think that. Like, these are the best albums to start with. Like Garlands,
definitely,
and Head Over Heels. They're okay albums, but
I know I like Garlands, or not Garlands, but I know I like Head Over Heels more than you.
Yeah, I don't like that album that much.
You know, I don't think it's a place to start, but I think it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah,
Garlands is, you know, I think we both pretty much agree on Garlands.
I just think you start with Treasure. Like,
I agree. I just think that you should check out Head Over Heels.
Nah, it's okay.
Yeah, whatever.
It's fine. I think you should probably just check out Treasure and not listen to any other ones. Right?
Yeah.
It's the best one.
I'm gonna like murder you when this is over.
Victorialand's pretty good. But yeah, I just I see that it's a risk, you know. I mean, to some extent, you know, especially releasing an album with no percussion at all. Yeah. And when Treasure was had such a pop emphasis, you know, like it was much more like catchy, and kind of making these songs blend together, and not in a bad way. Like, the Victorialand is a very soothing album.
It is.
Whereas Treasure's just not that. I mean, Treasure I could put on anytime, right? When I'm in my car, when I'm hanging out at home, anything like that. But Victorialand, I feel like I have to kind of be in the mood. It's a little bit of a sleepy album.
See, I know what you mean by it being a sleepy album, but I disagree about the mood thing. For me, at least, it's an album that I can always put on, and I just kind of, you know, get drawn into the music. Whereas, you know, Treasure, I have to be like, I feel like listening to the Cocteau Twins to put it on.
See, I feel the exact opposite way. Like, where I feel like Treasure I can put on anytime, in Victoria I'm like, I have to listen to the Cocteau Twins. Well, whatever. Yeah. I mean, it's still a good album. Like, they're both really good albums. And
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah. I would say that these two albums are definitely the place to start with this band.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yeah, the other two you can at your discretion.
You should check out Head Over Heels.
I recommend Treasure. But yeah, it's Victorialand.
The other two, I would say, if you're fans of the band and you really want to get into their catalog and learn more about their history and get into their past, then definitely go back and check out those albums. There's things on there that are, worth listening to. Garlands is definitely very guilty, as we already talked about, of being over repetitive.
Yes.
So you're gonna get the gist of the album very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Head Over Heels has a little more depth to it. I know you don't like it that much, but
No.
I think it, it's an interesting, look at their origins and where their sound came from.
Mm-hmm.
Treasure, I feel like they finally arrived as a band. And I know you disagree with me on this, but I think that once they get to Victorialand, it's like masterpiece.
I seriously think that they hit it with Treasure. I don't think a lot of people. I mean, like, it charts all the time for like best pop albums, best like,
so does Victorialand.
I don't know. I mean, like, it's just. I don't know.
I think it's a taste thing. It's like how you love First and Last Noise and I love Floodland.
First and last and always.
Dominion.
Yeah, I guess that it kind of is that way. It just depends on what your tastes are. Because, yeah, they're same musicians, but different kind of mood, sounds.
Different kind of production.
Yeah. So, but I do recommend Victorialand and and Treasure, but not really I don't really recommend Garlands, and I'm not that hot on Head Over Heels. So, you could, take that the way you will. But yeah, that's Victorialand.
Yep.
Oh, and good luck trying to find this one on vinyl.
Yeah, you're gonna pay a shit ton of money.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
We're working on ourselves.
Seriously. But great album.
If anybody wants to send me Victorialand and Donnie Treasure.
You can send me Victorialand too.
No.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, I really recommend it. Just go listen to them. Go listen to Treasure and Victorialand. Like you'll probably love them if you love something that's kind of like early shoegaze.
Yep.
But this has been GothCast episode 28. I am Dr. Sanders.
I'm Robbie Gore.
And GothCast is part of the Belfry Network. It's a network of podcasts, and they also feature a lot of different websites and YouTube channels and artists and everything related to goth culture. And so you can find all that at www.thebelfry.rip. That's www.thebelfry.rip.
It's a great URL.
Yeah. So if you're new to goth or trying to find something new, if you've seen it all, they have something for everybody.
Yeah, they got everything from podcasts to YouTubers to bloggers. They got everything there.
Mm-hmm. So go check that out.
And lastly, as always, we got to plug your social media. So we've got our Facebook, which is just GothCast. We have our YouTube account, which is GothCast Space Video. We have our Instagram account, which is GothCast again. Mm-hmm. We recently got a Tumblr.
Yep. It's gothcast.tumblr.com.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, of course, we have our website, which is gothcastradio.com, which is where you can find all of our content.
Yep.
It's very
simple
convenient.
place to go.
Yep. And we have our email address, which is gothcastradio@gmail.com. Of course, you can always reach us on any of these mediums. We're always happy to respond to comments, questions, requests.
Yep. And in fact, this episode was a request.
Yep.
So.
And I think we'd actually be curious to hear which album you guys like better. Do you guys like Treasure more? Or do you guys like Victorialand?
Yeah, obviously they can pick Treasure, but yeah, you can ask people. Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and stay spooky.